on this subject matter. Now I'd like to turn to a colleague of mine who I've had the pleasure of working with for many, many years. She was the chairperson of the California State Senate Banking and Finance Committee and now serves on the Financial Institutions Committee here in the United States Congress. The gentlewoman from the great state of California, Jackie Speier.
Thank you. I thank the gentleman from the great state of California. Excuse me. You know, today we had a hearing in Financial Services Committee in which we looked at the sort of an autopsy of Lehman Brothers. Lehman Brothers is particularly problematic for California, but also for many other states and local jurisdictions because so many of these local jurisdictions had money invested in what were investment-grade instruments at Lehman. And when Lehman went belly up, they lost everything. So in San Mateo County, for instance, $150 million just gone, even though it was prudently invested in investment-grade instruments at Lehman's. And many people lost their jobs, many classrooms weren't built, many developments that were supposed to take place didn't happen. It was interesting today because Mr. Fuld, who was the former CEO, said that Lehman Brothers was risk-averse. Ironic when a company had $20–30 billion that basically just evaporated overnight. I think it's really important as we discuss this issue, though, to take us back to how did we get to where we are today? How did we get to a place where everything came crashing down? And I'd like to just point to the cracks in Wall Street, which I think explains really well, if I get it right side up, what actually happened. If you recall, it was way before our time, certainly, but in the 30s, the Glass-Steagall Act was passed by this very Congress after a horrendous meltdown on Wall Street when we were in the throes of the Great Depression. And the Glass-Steagall Act said, never again is this going to happen, because we're going to keep the banks and the insurance companies and the securities firms all separate, that there were going to be a wall that separated them. And that worked perfectly for almost 60 years. And then all of a sudden, in 1996, Wall Street firms came a-calling. And they came a-calling with, oh, please, let us just get involved a little bit. Let us just become financial supermarkets. And so in 1996, the Federal Reserve reinterpreted the Glass-Steagall Act several times, eventually allowing bank holding companies to earn up to 25% of their revenues in investment bankings. But you know what? Greed is something that is never enough. That wasn't enough. So in 1999, they came a-calling to Congress again. This time they said, take down those walls. Take down those walls so that we can become these financial supermarkets, so we can be able to compete in Europe and across the continents, so that we can be as effective as they are in making money. So in 1999, the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act was passed by Congress, signed by then President Bill Clinton. It was promoted by the chair of the Fed, Greenspan, by Treasury Secretary Rubin, and by Lawrence Summers. And what that bill did, very simply, was repeal the Glass-Steagall Act. All those 60 years of protection down the drain. Then we move forward to 2000. We had a very smart person who was the head of the Commodities Future Trading Commission at the time. Her name was Brooksley Born. She had worked on for a law firm here in Washington for many years, and she knew all about derivatives. And all of a sudden, she saw the derivative market just escalate. And so she suggested that maybe we should look at this. Maybe there should be some basic form of regulation. Oh, no. Wall Street would have nothing to do with that. So she leaves the CFTC, and then immediately they come a-calling again, and this time Congress passes a bill that becomes law that says Congress is prohibited. Do you believe this? Congress is prohibited from regulating derivatives. Still not enough. Then, in 2004, it became obvious that Europe was getting a little nervous. And they basically said, if these bank holding companies weren't going to be regulated by their countries, then they would be subject to European regulation. Well, our investment banks wanted none of that, so they came a-calling this time to the SEC, and by regulation, the SEC passed on their own accord, not with congressional support or evaluation, a voluntary regulation to which all of the investment banks would be subject for regulation purposes, called the CSE, the Consolidated Supervised Entities Program. Besides giving them the benefit of having a regulator here in the United States so they wouldn't be subject to more scrutiny in Europe, it also did something that was quite frightening when we look back at it. It lifted the leverage cap that was 12 to 1. It didn't just lift it to 15 to 1 or 20 to 1. It raised it to whatever. It took away the leverage cap completely. So no surprise that when all of these various investment banks became troubled, like Goldman Sachs, they were at 30 to 1 and even higher in terms of leverage. So there you have what I believe is a pretty clear crack, as you see, in Wall Street that shows precisely what happened. Now, that crack actually got deeper because there was one more, and it was a very simple one, basically by the SEC and the courts, that said that these investment banks were not fiduciaries. That even though they were selling all of these instruments, that since they were taking a fee and they were taking a percentage and not a fee, that they were not fiduciaries. And by doing that, they had no legal obligation to say to anyone that they were shorting the very products they were selling, that they had side deals, that they did the very things that now we look at and we think, oh my God, how did we allow this to happen? So I think that as we bring back this bill, and hopefully that it doesn't get diluted in what was actually passed by the House, we're going to have something we can show the American people that's going to close all those cracks on Wall Street, that we're going to pave it over so that indeed the American people do have the kinds of protections they deserve.
Thank you very, very much for that description of the history. And if the gentlewoman from California would care to engage in a colloquy with me, I'd like to discuss some of our history. I recall when you were chairperson of the California